Well, what does that have to do with today's gospel? Among the meditations that we find in the patristic literature among the fathers and the church mothers is that they look at the parable of the sower and they say, God is faithful. God is extremely faithful. God, no matter what condition we're in, He's always coming after us. And that's what we heard today. We heard about this sower who sowed on every ground, no matter its condition. And we heard that even when the ground was not ready, God still sows and He still calls. And we see this over and over in today's readings in general. So when we read the Pauline epistle today, which was St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, in chapter 6 he writes, "And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises." And then he gives us the example of Abraham. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, "Surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you." This is the call of the sower to the ground. This is God's calling to us. He says, "I will bless you and multiply you." But this ground has to be tilted. So Abraham goes through many trials. He goes through many difficulties. And St. Paul writes, he says, "And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise." After Abraham had patiently endured, he obtained the promise because God is faithful. Because the sower that sows on every ground is faithful, no matter the condition of the ground. God is the ultimate sower. And some of the fathers, they say, well, what is this? What is the seed that's falling? And of course all of us would answer rightly and we would say, it's the Word of God. It's the Word of God that falls in the human heart and changes it. But sometimes they become a little more specific and they say, well, what is the gospel? What is it that's falling on our ears in this era of grace that we live in now? And they refer to Romans 5:8. When St. Paul wrote to the Romans and he told them, "But God proves His love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." They say if we could sum up the gospel in its whole, if we could sum up the cross, if we could sum up all of these things, they sometimes refer to this one verse, "But God proves His love for us, and that while we were sinners, Christ died for us." We could think of an example of our life, or maybe we've heard it in someone else's life, that someone who is really unkind to someone, maybe us, or maybe we were unkind to someone, and that person, in response to that unkindness, they respond with a lot of love, a tremendous amount of love. And then you feel obligated to respond in love. Having seen what that person did for you on a human level, on a very human level. We respond with love. And sometimes maybe that person's birthday might pass and we forget. And then what do we tell ourselves? Say, "Oh no, I didn't even call them and say happy birthday. And they did this and this and this for me. They helped me move. They went out of their way to, they lent me money. They gave me whatever it might be. They helped me with homework. But they went out of their way to do something for me. And I forgot their birthday. Something so small that would have showed them that I appreciate them went unheard, yani it was a missed opportunity. So St. Paul, he's reminding us, and he says, the love of God is much, much, much greater than that. He's the faithful sower who while we are sinners, he sows his love everywhere. And we have the free will to reject it. And that's what we heard today. We heard about the seed that fell by the wayside. Excuse me. We heard about the seed that fell by the wayside, which was symbolic of people who hear the word of God and the devil comes quickly and snatches it from them because they don't keep it in their heart. As Christ explained later in the same chapter, he said, it's those who receive the word of God without understanding. Meaning, I receive the word and I say, I have no interest in even understanding. So the devil comes and says, good, then let me take this. So it has no place in us. But maybe the others might apply more. And I only say that because most of us are in church. That others fell on stony places, and they had no depth. So they received the word of God with joy. They say, yes, God died for me. And we wear the cross around our necks very proudly. But then, as soon as there is a problem because of the commandments of God, meaning we stand out for being Christian, we stand out for anything related to God, Christ said he stumbles. That person who keeps the commandment and then becomes offended by it, he stumbles. So we then look at the commandment of God and we say, no, but God, I'm sure, didn't mean that I should really love my enemy. And so we end up twisting it in a different way to our own liking, and we don't follow the commandments of God. We stumble at the commandments of God. Even though when we heard it, we received it very joyfully. That was the seed that fell on stony places. And then he says others fell among thorns and got choked up. So as they started bringing fruit, the fruit got choked. And it's those that get caught up with the riches of life and as a result leave the commandment of God. Those that start focusing exclusively on the things that are seen and forget the things that are unseen. And we could take that at any age in our life. If we're in school, for example, we say, well, I'm only going to focus on school and never pray. That would be an example of this. I'm not saying don't study. That we need to study. But I'm saying it's when we trade things off. And then when we say, well, I have to work really hard for a long period of time, and then after I'm done with school, or after I'm done with work, and then we just put all these stipulations that never come. These are the riches that end up stopping the fruit. It's the same exact seed that fell by the wayside, that fell on the stony places, that also fell on the good ground and among the thorns. But the last one, the good ground, it's those who receive the word of God with understanding. And St. John Chrysostom, when he looks at this gospel, he says the more that we're able to keep the word of God in a lively way in our heart, the more we're able to really have a relationship with the word of God, the more that it starts to spring up even when we don't realize it. Because it's constantly in our heart. When we start to say, I'm going to live by the wisdom of God and not by the wisdom of the world. when we start relying on God, knowing that He's faithful, like we heard throughout today's readings. There is something that we could all really take away from today, which is we all are each of these grounds. At some point in my life, or throughout the day even, I could easily be the wayside. And the devil can come and take anything away from me. I could easily be the ground also that is stony and that has no depth, and I receive everything until it causes me trouble, and I say, well, I don't want God if He's going to be trouble. Then that's not the kind of God I want. I want an easy life. I would much rather have a very easy life. And then at other times we say, I want, and we get caught up with everything that's physical around us. And so for that we end up leaving God. But we also heard about the good ground that received this message of salvation, that God proved His love for us, that while we were still sinners, He died for us. And they had that as the measure of everything that they did. I'll conclude by reminding you of the parable of the servant, of the unjust servant who his master had forgiven him 10,000 denarii. 10,000. And then he runs and grabs his fellow servant who owes him 100 denarii, and he grabs him by the throat and he says, "Pay me what you owe me." This is us living our life unaware of what God